Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and happy Wednesday on a Thursday to our Bayou Blitz family. It feels like it's been quite some time since we said that. Matter of fact, I don't think we've had a show, Brendan's Thursday show, since the first night of our draft-a-thon, back in late April, early May. So it's just your Bayou Blitz co-host, Bob Rose, Brendan Boylan, showing the power that we have to shift days of the week. I am Bob Rose. I'm one of your co-hosts, one of your tri-hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast tonight. Joining me is my namesake, the smarter, cuter, and younger of the two of us, Mr. William Rose, right here. And of course, every week, as always, my partner in crime and co-host, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
So far, so good. And you had me thinking about it. I think we had been on a pretty solid streak. I think it was April, even before the draft. So you're looking at April, May, almost halfway through June. So we did pretty good there for a while, keeping everything in line. But, things happen. And honestly, it might have been good to wait a day because one of our biggest talking points is happening because it happened today and not yesterday. So I guess the football gods were on our side for shifting and moving some things around.
Sort of. The football gods might have been on our side. They sure as hell weren't on the side of the New Orleans Saints in the last 36 hours. That's for sure.
That is true. 100% true there. So I guess we'll dive right on into it. And if you guys saw the thumbnail or you guys, see the title below us, Alvin Kamara missing the Saints mandatory team activities today as he is reportedly seeking a new contract. Bob, I think the language of all this and how it is being reported is fairly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because typically when it says seeking new contract, you want more money. And when you look at Kamara's salary for the next 2 years, and especially the last year of that 5-year, $75 million deal, you look at it and go, there's no way in hell that the Saints are paying him that much money. There's no way in hell. I don't know. You might even say all 30 teams in the league. Like there's no chance, right? So I think the language of this is very interesting because the way that I interpret it is a little different. I think it is more Kamara seeking a contract for more years, seeking some security over the next few years while still getting paid. Because him and his agent probably look ahead, and the Saints as well, and go, you know what? After this year, I don't know if we're going to be able to pay Alvin all that money.
Mm-hmm.
So in very normal Saints style, let's stretch that contract out. Let's renegotiate a little bit. That's the way that I interpret all this. But that's a little different than your typical holdout, if you will, when you're talking about contract negotiations. This is a little backwards from our standards and our usuals.
Yeah, it is because we're used to, especially in this day and age of athlete, just greed. Greed and notoriety are always the two major sticking points, during holdouts, as you pointed out. And obviously the national media, who never bothers to do even an ounce of research, particularly when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. They jumped all over this, saying, Kamara wants to be the highest paid running back in the NFL. Kamara wants out of New Orleans. Kamara isn't happy with the Saints organization. None of that is true, as you just pointed out. Alvin has an $18.6 million cap hit this year and a cap hit that's over $29 million next year. So that already fueled a lot of speculation. We're joined by another a quad host, but that fueled even more speculation that the Saints were going to be willing to move on from Kamara in after 2024. But as you pointed out, the language is very important. While Kamara's cap hit goes up astronomically next year, his guaranteed money goes away. I think has like 10.2 million guaranteed this year. And if I read the language of the contract that's available for public details right, Kamara has no guaranteed money for him next year, which means he's kind of out there twisting in the wind. Now, if Alvin Kamara, knock on wood, if Alvin Kamara stays healthy, if Alvin Kamara stays healthy, and hypothetically the Saints release him into 2025, he'd be a free agent for all of about a minute and a half before another team scooped him up. But in this day and age of the NFL, you can never say never. You don't know whether his production, which he's coming off a career worst season, if his production continues to go down, if he does get hurt, then all of a sudden his marketability flutters away. So I think I agree with you. Alvin is just looking for A, security, and B, I believe that Alvin Kamara legitimately wants to stay in New Orleans. In an interview, I forget which Saints writer. I know it wasn't me, so I won't take credit for it, or our network. But in an interview with the Saints writer, Alvin's agent said within this past 24 hours, well, really 10 hours, Alvin's agent says that Kamara does indeed love the city of New Orleans, loves Saints fans, and has no desire to go anywhere. So that does lead us to believe exactly what you said, that he is just looking for additional years. It's hard to fault Alvin for that because there is a certain sense of loyalty there that you don't see often in today's athlete. And, consider that there are 5 running backs in the NFL that average over $10 million a year now. Christian McCaffrey, who, remember, just re-signed, just got extended on a 2-year deal. Alvin Kamara, second behind only McCaffrey. Then you have Jonathan Taylor and two running backs that signed as free agents elsewhere this season, Saquon Barkley of the Eagles and Josh Jacobs of the Packers. That's it, just 5. And the earlier the iron hits, as the saying goes, always strike while the iron's hot. And Alvin is going to turn 29 this July, day after training camp starts. That's obviously the age, if you've done any research about NFL running backs, that is traditionally the age where running backs go into a steep decline. And as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, it's kind of bad enough. It's a bad enough look that Alvin is coming off a career worst season production-wise. Now, you can blame a lot of that on the offensive coordinator and a putrid offensive line, but nonetheless, the numbers on the page speak that Alvin Kamara could potentially be in a decline. Whether that's reality or not, that's what the numbers say. The age that he's at, 29. So I see what he's doing here. And I see what he's angling for. And I don't blame him one bit. You're trying to continue to get paid, but you're also, more importantly, trying to establish some security for at least the next few years. When, frankly, if you look deeper into Kamara's existing contract, there is no security after this year.
I'm glad you brought up the fact that it has been essentially publicly known from Alvin that he wants to be a Saint for life. And as you said, Bob, in today's, not just NFL, in today's world of athletes, the sense of loyalty, like to that degree, to that extent, is almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has to be rewarded for the people that are out there that go, oh, well, Alvin's numbers have declined. Bob and I'd be the first to tell you, even going to 2019 when he was banged up a little bit, which was one of the first years that there was definitely a decrease in production from Alvin. And even going to last year, the year before, yeah, you can blame plenty of it on Pete Carmichael, how the offense was run.
Yeah.
I think Bob's patented and famous saying last season of maybe Carmichael will remember how to use Alvin Kamara as a pass catcher, like things like that. Sure. Yes, he's hitting 29. Yes, he's not worth $29 million a year, as you said, Bob. I think that's all clear and obvious. But I think one thing that is super valuable about Alvin is, one, his locker room presence. He's a pretty liked guy. Two, the loyalty to the team, the fan base, and the city itself. And three, even on a decline that he may be on, we're not saying he is on one. I think this year will be very evident where Alvin is. He can still bring a lot of value. Guys that are shifty like that, yeah, they start losing a step. Yeah, they're a little less agile. Yeah, they're a little slower. But you put the ball in their hands and they still have flashes. They still have moments. I think Kendre Miller's a guy that was drafted to not just help the Saints running game, and this might sound goofy, but maybe even prolong the career of Alvin Kamara by making sure he gets hit less. He has less touches. He's utilized in a way to where he's not having to touch the ball 30 times a game like he was during some of those peak fantasy football seasons, right?
Also, sorry for the interruption, also probably playing under an offensive coordinator that isn't going to run him up the gut of a defense 15 times a game.
There was the other Bob Rose patented saying. That patented saying brought to you by Great Value Coffee. Just a throwback.
I got tons of Great Value coffee, but a coffee maker that's broken, so I haven't had a legitimate cup of coffee in 2 days.
Well, I'm about to Amazon Prime you a coffee maker. You know what? I might do that as soon as this show's over.
You could be saving the lives of several people in this household.
I might honestly have to do that. Get the cheapest one I can get to you overnight. If you guys would like to donate to the cause, please tweet at Bob Rose or at BobYR2613 or at BT Boylan after the show for our Venmos. I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, I think the whole thing with Alvin is getting to a point, and I don't think it's necessarily difficult, but it is getting to a point where both Alvin goes, yeah, I'm happy with the amount of years, and the Saints go, yes, we're happy with the amount of years and whatever that cap number is going to be. Now, the Saints are known for, playing jump rope with the cap, and the cap's not real and all sorts of things. So we'll see how this ultimately ends up, but like you said at the beginning, Bob, the national media that are like, whoa, Alvin Kamara, like skipping out on mandatory team activities and he's going to request a trade and like, that's just not true. He just wants a sense of security, I believe, and more guaranteed years on his contract.
Yeah, and because of prior restructures, there are already two, a term that the Saints really should patent so that way they can make some extra money. 2 voided years on Alvin's contract as it stands. So, in other words, there's a very simple solution to all this. You already have the cap years there. All you need to do is come up with a financial figure with Alvin and his representatives, that's satisfactory to Alvin and his representatives, where you could spread the cap hit now, not just the next 2 years, but the next 4 years, and add whatever guaranteed money that you need to add for Alvin Kamara. So to me, it's a very simple solution. All they need to do, the Saints, that is come up with well, they do have a decision to make. If they want to keep Alvin, then long term past this season, then again, you have the 4 years to work with on the contract, counting those 2 voided years. All you need to do is come up with the guaranteed money and the overall annual salary that Alvin is happy with, that you can spread out. Now the gamble is here again. Alvin is going to be 29 years old. Has a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot of mileage on him, but a lot of usage on him because of his versatility. So, Clint Kubiak has to believe that Alvin Kamara is a solution for his offense for the next 3 to 4 years, because if they sit down at the negotiating table, that's what is essentially going to cost the Saints money, of course, but money and a commitment for the next 3 to 4 years.
And we'll see if the Saints can get it done. Like you said, I'm entirely with you, Bob. I don't think this is a really difficult thing. I think, frankly, it's a pretty simple thing when it's all said and done, of going, you know what? Let's just hash this out, because at the end of the day, like, you want to be here, we want you here. Like, I just don't see that being a real issue. Let's move to tight end, because we have a couple different stories, maybe more than a couple different stories when it comes to tight ends. The biggest one being Juwan Johnson suffering a lower body injury. I believe it was classified as a foot injury.
Yes.
That's going to require some surgery. He's expected to miss, quote unquote, significant time, but expects to be ready for the beginning of the season. Bob, Juwan was in a position where I don't want to necessarily say his job's on the line. I think that's a little dramatic, but that ceiling that was so talked about just a few years ago as being like a good pass catcher at the tight end position in the league, it's starting to be in question, and how the Saints are going to utilize him, not just this year, but potentially in the future, if at all, wasn't a question. We felt like it was a year where Juwan Johnson had to have a bounce back year. Quite the setback for Juwan. Just your initial thoughts when it comes to the injury.
I'm disappointed for Juwan, because I really like the kid. As you know from doing the draft with me every year, I liked him coming out of Oregon. I liked him before he transferred to Oregon when he was at Penn State, back when he was just a big body wideout. I give all the credit to all the credit in the world to Juwan Johnson. When he was asked to convert to tight end a couple years or not going on 3 years ago, he embraced the change. And you saw his progression immediately that first year back in 2022 when he had kind of a mini breakout. You and I were singing his praises every single week. Again, I like the kid. I love his work ethic. I love the matchup problems he presents for defenses on the football field. But you and I believe when Clint Kubiak was first hired, the second player, first player we thought of was Alvin Kamara and his fit in Clint's offense. The second player we got big grins about was Juwan Johnson, because of the way the Kubiak-Shanahan system has traditionally used athletic tight ends. Well, we're hearing that Juwan should be on target to be ready for the regular season opener, September 8th against Carolina. First of all, especially with a foot injury, foot injuries can be tricky. Rehab doesn't go well. You have a setback. You just frankly don't progress as quickly as expected. So any number of things could happen, to give you a setback. But that, regular season opener feels like a best case scenario. What people aren't talking about is this isn't like the Pete Carmichael offense, the same offense that Juwan played his first 4 years in. He, like everybody else on the team, has to learn the new system, the new terminology, the hot reads, the motions, etc. And while he can learn that in the film room, he can learn that in the playbook, there's also something to be said for on-the-field experience, and that's not something that Juwan Johnson is going to have. And therefore, it's a tough break for the Saints offense, too, because, you have Foster Moreau, but Foster isn't the same kind of player as, Juwan Johnson. The only other player you brought in was Dallin Halker, who I understand is, he's the Saints. He's a lot of Saints fans' camp crush right now. And I can understand why. I like to film with Halker a lot. But the reality is, Dallin went undrafted for a reason. There are holes in his game. And while he did have some impressive moments in OTAs, we'll wait to see if he continues to be impressive when the pads go on for real, when those scrimmages start with the San Francisco 49ers, when the 3 preseason games, start to kick off. And, if Hawker doesn't progress as obviously he would hope, you have a big hole here at tight end because Jawan Johnson isn't ready to go. And I know what the progression is, and what the expectation is, but there's no guarantee that he is going to be ready to go on the field by September 8th.
I think just to kind of piggyback off of that is, you don't want to call it a massive hole or a gaping hole, but there's some concern at that position now. And I know what some of you are probably thinking, or what some of you are probably saying at home or wherever you're watching or listening, is saying something like, well, what about Taysom Hill? Yeah, you probably see a little bit of Taysom Hill if Jawan's not ready. But
Sure.
It's been a position that, and we're going to get to Jimmy anyway, so I guess we'll just transition here and kind of use this as a segue. But hasn't that been the knock on the Saints since Jimmy left? The Saints haven't had consistency at the tight end position. And this is another thing is, obviously Jawan is nowhere near that tier. He's had some moments where he looks like he could be a really good ball player, but there hasn't been a consistency in that room for a while, and we were hoping to see it. Starting last year with the addition of Foster Moreau and Jimmy Graham coming back, but we're still not seeing it out of New Orleans. And with that, since I brought up his name, Bob, Jimmy Graham has came out and said he isn't 100% sure whether he's going to retire or not, but the Saints will be the first team to know whatever that decision is. Would you welcome Jimmy Graham back?
100%, 1,000%, 1,000,000%. And I realize part of this is coming from nostalgia on my part because I'm a huge Jimmy Graham fan. I always have been. But to me, Jimmy showed that he could still play last year. Pete Carmichael forgot he was on the roster, and forgot that Jimmy Graham was 6'7", forgot that Jimmy Graham has outstanding hands, and forgot that Jimmy Graham uses his body in traffic better than maybe ever any tight end ever. Yes, ever, and I'll stand by that statement. But I think we've trashed enough on Pete Carmichael tonight. I say that, yet 5 minutes later we'll probably do the same thing. But to me, Jimmy certainly showed that he could still play if he wants to. But then I wrote about that on our network. I think probably going on 2 weeks ago now. So check that out. You can find it on my personal page, either Facebook or Twitter. That I wrote that I believe that the Saints should bring Jimmy Graham back, and this was well before the Jawan Johnson injury. I believe that Jimmy could add competition to the roster, could be a mismatch weapon in certain situations, particularly in the goal line, and in certain multi-receiver alignments. And again, going back to Dallin Holker, if Holker isn't ready to play, then you can't ask for a better on-field mentor than a guy like Jimmy Graham, who's been there and seen it, seen it all, done it all. And I wrote at the time that if Jimmy still wants to play, that the Saints would be frankly fools not to bring him back. Now, of course, the caveat to all this is, does Jimmy want to play? And he was fairly non-committal on it. And the other issue is Jimmy is getting ready for a rowing expedition across the Arctic Ocean. So I don't think we could question that Jimmy Graham is in excellent shape. Football shape, a little bit different story. That's another conversation for another time. But Jimmy won't even be back until late July. So these conversations with the Saints, and you're right, you're absolutely right. He told ESPN, he made it sound very much like if Jimmy Graham comes back, it will be with the New Orleans Saints. And that's the conversation that he's going to have. But again, that won't be until late July.
Well, thankfully, I think Jimmy understands that he would be a situational player.
Yes.
And could probably get caught up to speed a little faster than someone who would be expected to play 70% of the snaps.
Yes.
With that said, I would love to see Jimmy back for that reason. The Saints really struggled in the red zone last year. If he's going to be situational, I think, and especially with how creative Kubiak is and how his system runs, you're going to have different matchups where just size-wise you're going to win. When it comes to Jimmy putting guys in motion, misdirections, and just really confusing secondaries on different schemes and route trees for guys. And I mean, it's really easy to make the comparison, but you saw how the Saints were able to manipulate defenses in like 2011, in particular with Darren Sproles coming out of the backfield and Jimmy Graham lining up. I mean, you could run something very similar with Alvin Kamara or even Kendre Miller. Even if you only run a few of those a game, I still think there's opportunities. Do I think Jimmy comes back? I think, you might say, oh, it's 50-50. I think it's a little better than 50-50 because when you're about to go on this huge rowing expedition and you still have the itch for it and you realize, like, maybe I don't want to be done.
Yeah.
I think that leans more to I do want to come back or I'm unhappy with how it ended. And again, it's going to be situational. I would hope it's a little bit more than last year's production, but you could also potentially expect it to be very similar to last year where he's playing, 5% of snaps, if that, in games?
Yeah, my problem wasn't the amount of snaps that he played, though. Yeah, exactly. It was how and when he was used and the fact that he just wasn't active, some games. And you and I did pre-game and post-game shows nearly every single week last year, and a lot of times we were in disbelief either that he was inactive, and that included Juwan Johnson missed a couple games with I believe it was an ankle injury last year, and they still didn't activate Jimmy for one or two of those games. When they did have him on the field, they were using him as a blocker. Jimmy Graham, despite his frame, is never going to be confused with an extra blocker on the offensive line. I completely agree with you that if he were to come back, it's as a part-time / situational player. Just as we thought it would be last year, it was just those situations that they used him in were just baffling.
Amen to that. I do want to get to the chat. Jerry says birthday is Friday. Happy
birthday, Jerry.
I hope you enjoy it with your family. Also said we need to keep Kamara in New Orleans. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. And I'm sure that'll be a conversation for following weeks as well. Bob, it's getting to that time of year, obviously, with certain guys, getting back in the building for the first time in a while and some other rumors. We've talked about Marshon Lattimore a little bit, but that was one of the highlights back in the building this week was Marshon Lattimore. Had a couple additional comments on kind of what happened last year and the trade rumors and this and that, and said that him and DA kind of worked out their personal problems and put him to rest. Bob, how much of that do you believe? I mean, we have a game, obviously dot or drop. So I guess, do you dot or drop the comments from Marshon Lattimore? Do you feel them as genuine or do you feel them as player speak to get through an awkward phase during training camp?
It is a little bit of both, but I lean more towards dot that I legitimize a lot of what Lattimore said. Reason is this: Marshon Lattimore has played for Dennis Allen since 2017, the year he came into the league. There's no coach in the league that knows him better than DA. Frankly, the type of coverages that DA wants to employ in most of his defensive game plans is exactly suited towards Marshon Lattimore's style of play. I do think Marshon, he wants to win. He is a competitor. But I also think Marshon is pretty intelligent, at least intelligent enough to recognize that Dennis Allen's style of play fits what Lattimore does best. Again, just like with Kamara, Lattimore is mostly beloved in the city of New Orleans because of the fact that he was an instant success, and he has sustained that success throughout his entire career. I don't think there's, and we've talked about it on this show. We've talked about it with Alan Ulrich. I don't think there's any question that Marshawn Lattimore is the best, number one cornerback in New Orleans Saints franchise history. Now, you look at that list of cornerbacks, and it's not a daunting list. But to say that you're the number one of anything is pretty damn satisfying. Um, and I do think that Marshawn recognizes all this. I know that there was a lot of speculation, and maybe he didn't want to play. Some question his intestinal fortitude a little bit when they were losing. I believe it was one of the two people on this show. I don't know if they're wearing a gold-colored shirt at this time or not. It's a darkened room for me, but I know you're tempted to jump in. But yeah, I mean, I own my comments. I question Lattimore's desire to play. I never question his desire to be a New Orleans Saint. Obviously, he was apparently displeased with the way things went. But it's not, as you and I spoke about it at the time, it wasn't at all unusual for Marshawn to miss OTAs. He's done it before, and it wasn't any kind of statement. It was just he was a veteran player. He sat out the voluntary workouts, and it was never a big issue because Marshawn Lattimore, just like Alvin Kamara, another player who often sat out OTAs, always kept himself in phenomenal shape. Lattimore had a very serious abdominal injury 2 years ago, and sometimes it takes a while to recover from that. As far as his unpleasant feelings towards the coaching staff, yeah, I know Sean Payton left 2 years ago, but a lot of those coaches remained, including his defensive coordinator, his de facto defensive backs coach, one and the same, Dennis Allen. So, whatever fences needed to be mended, I think it probably took about a 10-minute conversation to actually mend those fences. So, yeah, I do take Lattimore for most of what his word is.
That 17 draft class is one of those, at least with the guys that are left, which is really just Lattimore and Kamara.
Yeah, Ramczyk. As soon as he can walk again, right?
Let's say it maybe Ramczyk. There is a sense with that group of like unwavering loyalty to New Orleans, which I can really appreciate. But ironically, you'd said that there was a certain podcast host / writer that may have called out Marshawn Lattimore for his lack of heart or willingness to play. It can equally be said about Kamara as well.
Yeah.
Times throughout his career does he really want to play?
Yeah.
And I think that's odd.
You pointed to that. I mean, in one case, we're talking about a player who you question how hurt he really was when he was missing games. And in AK-41, we were both openly questioning his effort on the field at certain times.
And so isn't it weird to sit and have a conversation? Well, these guys really want to be in New Orleans. Like they want to be Saints for life. And typically when you want to be a Saint for life or any lifer, you play as hard as you can because it means so much to you. I think it's a little odd that we talk about that, but we're also bringing up the conversation of, well, it wasn't that long ago that we were questioning, along with Saints fans, other national and local reporters, on whether or not they were either falsifying their injuries a little bit or exaggerating their injuries a little bit. I can't say falsify, but exaggerating theirs a little bit, or whether they really just wanted to play or not. Now, different coaching staffs, obviously, a lot of big changes for the New Orleans Saints coaching staff. But I think that's one thing to kind of keep an eye on, too, is when it comes to whether or not some of these words are just player speak or actually genuine. Both guys is I think it's going to show a lot on the field this year. It's like if you want to be here long term, if you're Alvin Kamara, whether the deal gets done or not, you got to play like you want to be here long term.
Yep.
And Lattimore, same thing. If it's really in the past and you guys are going to work through it and you do want to be in New Orleans for a long time, then you got to be that guy that was the number one corner, or arguably the number one corner in football for that stretch of time. So to me, it's intriguing. It's interesting. But that's just kind of how the off season goes, right? We have these conversations and we will continue to have these conversations. While we talk about OTAs, mini camp, what's mandatory, what's not, and you're going to hate me, but we're going to keep talking about the quarterbacks. We're going to keep doing it. Derek Carr looks pretty good so far in OTAs. Jake Haener's looked pretty good so far in OTAs. Hall of Fame quarterback Spencer Rattler has been maybe a little rattled so far during OTAs, and we don't really need to talk about Nate Peterman, do we? But
no, it's not necessary.
Right, cool. So, how much stock do you put into? And we've talked about this before, but it's something that we almost have to talk about every week. Is how much stock do you put into some of these numbers? Because one thing you and I both talked about is out of all of this, the biggest thing we were concerned about was seeing how quickly Derek Carr could digest a new playbook, how quickly Derek Carr was going to show again the Pro Bowl caliber quarterback that he was, if he could. And right now, playing pretty well during, what we can see at the OTAs, and big shout out to John Hendricks and all that he does in terms of his work covering the team, boots on the ground. And I mean, he essentially gives you a full breakdown of every single play from every single moment. But Carr looks good. Carr's starting to say the right things to the media today, stating that, he wants more than 9 wins. Like, that's the expectation, is to get to double-digit wins. He's saying the right things. He's playing well. So I guess I'll alter this question because, who wants to talk about going – I don't even know what his stats were off the top of my head without looking them up. But who wants to talk about that? Not a lot of people. Not me, at least. I know you don't either, because you hate this time of year when it comes to talking about quarterbacks. But I digress. What is it going to take for Derek Carr to win over some of this fan base? Because, and I know the easy answer is just winning football games. Yeah. Like, that is the easiest of easy, right? But he is starting to say the right things. He is looking pretty good so far this offseason. What more is on that checklist that he's got to check off to start winning this fan base back? Or is he doomed?
You know what? In the eye, if you were to believe a certain fraction of Saints social media, there's not a damn thing that Derek Carr or Dennis Allen can do right. They could go undefeated. It set records for offensive production and defensive efficiency. Roll to a Super Bowl title, and there will still be people that want one or both out the door. So I'm ignoring those a-holes. Most of the fan base that is against Derek Carr, that has some reasonable working brain cells, for Derek to be able to win them over, it's going, as you pointed out, obviously you need to win games. In Derek's case, the Saints need to do so early. They need to come out of the gate strong, something we've not seen in the last couple of years now. And I don't mean the season opener. I mean the month of September, or the first 6 weeks into October, kind of strong, where you're coming out 4-2, 5-1, and you're looking damn good. You not only need to do something like that, but Derek has to pull out a few games in the final moments, or just have, one of those. And I'm not comparing him to Drew Brees by any stretch, but one of those Drew Brees type of games where he is just unconscious As far as his accuracy, his play calling, and his decision making. He needs a few moments like that to really start to win over the fans, and even at that point, there's still going to be a ridiculous amount of people saying, oh, he just got lucky here. Let's see if he could do it the whole season. Blah blah blah. But I'll say this. I agree with you that Derek is saying all the right things. He looks comfortable. And that's my takeaway from these quarterbacks right now. I'm watching to see who looks comfortable and who looks really tight and just generally uncomfortable right now. As far as the numbers, they're throwing against air, and it's not air that even counts. Get back to me when the pads go on, and the pass rushers start flying at you for real, and the Pro Bowl caliber defensive backs start baiting you. Get back to me when the games count. Until then, if you want to, if you're on the other side of the equation, and I had a mental midget try to get into it with me on Twitter earlier today, saying because I said, hey, I do believe that Carr will be a nice fit for this system, but I'm holding my judgment until I see the games count for real, until I see the pass rushers and the defensive backs come at him for real. So I'll hold my judgment until that happens. But I certainly think it can happen, and I hope it will. Being both a media coverage and a fan of the team. But yeah, this mental midget, was pretty much guaranteeing me, calling me ridiculous for, saying Carr wasn't going to be fit in the system. A, that's not what I said. And B, as I responded to this moron, I said, look, if you want to bet your house, that Derek Carr is going to be a great quarterback when you watch him throwing against air. You go right ahead, and I'm rooting for you to hit it back. But again, I'll reserve my judgment until the downs start counting for real.
Well, there you have it. If you guys want to go at it with Bob Rose on Twitter, you're gonna get it. I think ultimately it's the cop-out answer, but I think that winning is simply the only way it's going to fix anything. This might be the first time I've ever said this like publicly, but and I'm gonna get hate for this. So I'm ready for my Twitter hate. I do think that Derek Carr's gotten the raw end of the deal. I think that he has a very unnecessary target on his back. Now, some of that is his own doing, right?
Yeah.
Like some of that is being hyped to be this guy that's going to bring New Orleans back to the playoffs and not performing early in the year. But to what you said is, I wouldn't say it's some of the fan base. I think a lot of the fan base is in the opinion of nothing this guy can do is going to be right for the rest of his time in New Orleans. And look, at the end of the day, depending on how long he stays, if you take the numbers he just had last season and you multiply that by 4 is how many years, 4-year contract, he would be one of the best New Orleans Saints quarterbacks ever statistically. Now, that's not saying a whole lot because it's like Drew Brees and then everybody else.
Right.
But he would. And, what was the knock on Carr his whole career, right? Is like you didn't kind of know what kind of Derek Carr you were going to get. You're either going to get like the Andy Dalton line, somewhere in there, like very average. There's a couple years where maybe he went a little above average, but he was always that guy that was like, well, he's not a first tier guy. He's not a second tier guy. He's like maybe a third tier guy that like at points in his career has snuck his way into a top tier, top 2 tier. But I don't know. Like, yes, I've been very critical of Derek Carr. Yes, Bob has been very critical of Derek Carr. the people that have watched me on this show or listened to this show for the last however long we've been doing it together, Bob, knows my feelings on Jameis Winston
Mhm.
and how I thought that he got shafted of what should have been a chance for him to revitalize his career. I think that's still worse. I don't know if you could
Yeah.
say that Derek's got the raw end of the deal, but to not have the support of the fan base, I think, is a difficult part that I did not foresee happening as quickly as it happened.
No,
Right?
not as quickly.
If it was this bad for like 3 years, right, and we're in like year 3, then I expect the boos coming out when he trots on the field. Then I expect people to start saying like he can't do anything right. To see it happen so quickly for a guy that in the offseason, a lot of people were super thrilled was coming to New Orleans. I didn't expect it to happen that quickly. Maybe it's because Saints fans of the last 20 years are a little spoiled because you had Drew Brees for as long as you did. And Jameis did have moments before he got hurt. That game against Green Bay and Jacksonville, masterclass Jameis Winston game, one of my favorite memories. The comeback against Atlanta, one of my favorite. So just week 1 Jameis. But ultimately, like, I just didn't expect it to turn so sour so quick. And trust me, I too was one person that said that the Boo Birds were deserved when they came out during last year because of how bad it had been. I just can't believe we're at a state where it's like, how do I put this? And you've already made the jokes with future Hall of Famer Spencer Rattler. But if the Saints even if the Saints win games, but they're ugly wins.
Yeah.
Like, think Tennessee last year. Like, ugly win, but the Saints got it done. Derek Carr doesn't have the greatest game ever, but he does enough at the end to win the game. You have enough of those games and some tough losses, you're going to have people calling Jake Hayner's name and for Spencer Rattler's name by week 4.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say I don't think Derek Carr, or I think Derek Carr's got the, a rough go of it, because this is a fan base and an organization that has always backed guys, right? Even to an extent, there are some guys that we don't talk about, but for the most part, it's like once a Saint, always a Saint, will always have support regardless of what's going on. And Derek's just one of those guys where it's like, well, damn, I did not expect it to be like we love Derek Carr for like 2 weeks and then, let's just burn jerseys. Some of the memes are great. I love you guys that create those because they're wonderful. There's a guy in the comments on YouTube, Rose City, has the AI generated image from Christmas of the kid pulling the Derek Carr jersey out and crying because that was his Christmas gift. Stuff like that's funny, right? I'll tip my hat to those people.
Unless you're Derek Carr and you read social media, that can't be easy.
Yeah, and it's just one of those like, wow, it went south. So ultimately, very long-winded way of saying, I don't know if he can win the fan base back outside of winning football games.
And even that, it's going to have to be a lot of football games and big games. I forget who said it, and it was a while ago, as in maybe even as far back as the 80s, if not the 80s, it was certainly the 90s. But it was in reference to football player, quarterback specifically. You never want to be the guy that replaces the legend. You want to be the guy who replaces the guy who replaced the legend. Because no matter what you do when you're replacing a legend, it is never going to be enough. And I realize that Derek Carr wasn't the immediate starter after Drew Brees, but you can't count Jameis Winston, my opinion, because he got hurt. When he came back, he got hurt again. And to your point, and we are in agreement here, he never really got a fair shot with Dennis Allen. So I don't consider Jameis Winston as the guy who is trying to replace Drew Brees. It wasn't Trevor Siemian. He had to replace Winston. It wasn't Andy Dalton. He had to replace Winston. Derek Carr is the guy who Dennis Allen, handpicked to replace the legend. This is the guy that's going to replace Drew Brees, you Saints fans. And oh, by the way, Derek Carr had to come in without the guy who helped Brees achieve those heights, and Sean Payton. He's gone. Pete Carmichael, a stale offensive coordinator who was well past his prime and thrust into a role that he's not only not comfortable with, but just frankly not suited for. And one of the worst offensive line, I say one of, frankly, I thought it was the worst offensive line in the league last year. That's a recipe for disaster. And I'm a football historian, as you know. You look, there are so few instances where you get a Steve Young to replace a Joe Montana, or an Aaron Rodgers to replace a Brett Favre. Those are once in a lifetimes. And if you're an older football fan, you probably know that Steve Young, even 3 straight league MVPs, Hall of Fame quarterback, Super Bowl championship, Super Bowl MVP. Many 49ers fans say to this day he couldn't carry Joe Montana's jock. That's a hell of a resume to have that kind of crap said about you. Danny White, when he replaced Roger Staubach for the Dallas Cowboys, Danny went to 3 straight NFC championship games, won league MVP one year, and went to the playoffs in like 6 of 7 years or 7 of 8 years for an aging Cowboys team. Danny White is vilified by Cowboys fans. You don't say the name Danny White without being prepared to duck. It takes sometimes decades. You look at what the Miami Dolphins have had at quarterback since Dan Marino retired. Denver Broncos, what they had at quarterback since John Elway retired. Now, I know they had those two and a half years with Peyton Manning that were absolutely spectacular. They hit the jackpot there. And even there, then it took 11 years to get it. Look at the number of years the Steelers went between Terry Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger. And the Steelers are a great example here, because the Steelers were a perennial playoff team that even went to a Super Bowl during that interim between Bradshaw and Roethlisberger. That, I think it was 20 some odd years. But I could tell you firsthand, Bubby Brister, Cliff Stout, Mark Malone, Neil O'Donnell, Cordell Stewart, Tommy Maddox. A couple of those guys had pretty darn good seasons. But, they're looked at as absolute trash by Steeler fans up here. And the Steelers were perennial Super Bowl favorites, or at least AFC contenders. So you look at history, and history does not bode well for Derek Carr. And it might take nothing less than a Super Bowl championship and an MVP trophy in there, whether it's league MVP or Super Bowl MVP, to even win over a good portion of these Saints fans. That's not fair, but that might be reality.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. What kind of sick world would we live in if Derek Carr wins an MVP in New Orleans, but Drew Brees did? Yeah. But to your point, and I just because you said the name, it's not a name I hear a whole lot anymore. Tommy Maddox took that team to a playoff game.
Yes, sir.
So, it's just one of those things. Like, we could all name the obscure quarterbacks. Cordell Stewart actually did some radio after he was done down in the Atlanta area as well. And everybody knows him from, Colorado and Slash. But that was another guy that was like, it didn't work. And for New Orleans, I hope that when we look back after Drew and we say the names, we'll throw the guys that played when Drew was hurt too. Teddy Bridgewater is always going to be beloved by Saints fans, no matter what. But you got Teddy, you have Taysom, you have Simeon, you have Jameis, you have Dalton. I hope we can kind of breeze over a lot of that. And maybe Derek Carr is the guy that, gets you over the bridge, or maybe Derek Carr is just another piece of the bridge until you get to whatever quarterback leads you to the promised lands. But I think you're right, Bob. I think it is going to take a hell of a playoff run or a championship at the end of it for any love to go back Carr's way. And like I said, some of it deservingly, some of it not. More than anything, shocked how quickly it turned. So hopefully he continues to say the right things. Hopefully the Saints win double-digit games for the first time in a while. And I think that would all but secure a playoff spot in the end as well. Bob will close the show with dot or drop, one on each side. It can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about, necessarily the current status of the New Orleans Saints, but I'll let you go first.
Dot or drop, a prolonged holdout by Alvin Kamara. And I say prolonged, one that carries 2 weeks into training camp. A prolonged holdout from Alvin Kamara will absolutely hurt his production in 2024.
Drop. I just don't see it. I'm not. Yes, you have to learn a new offense, but I think that's also going to be in the minds of both to get a deal across the finish line, if you will. But drop, because I don't think it gets much worse than it did last year.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and I think more than anything, just utilization of him. So no, I'll drop that. You know what? It's an interesting topic because the Saints have never done it, right? They've never retired a jersey. So with Drew Brees going into the Saints Hall of Fame later this year, should Drew Brees have his number truly retired? Dot or drop?
Dot. And not only should Drew Brees have his number retired, they honestly, and this is nostalgic speaking, but Drew Brees should have a statue of him outside of the Superdome, and both of those things should happen this year. The game that they officially do the ceremony for Brees's Saints Hall of Fame induction, most of us believe that will be against the Denver Broncos, although it's not officially announced yet. Assuming that it is, that has to be the moment that you retire Nine's jersey too. I mean, Sean Payton is in the building. It's a primetime game. But in my opinion as well, with the Super Bowl being in New Orleans this year, you need to get workers out there on the double and get that statue erected outside of the Superdome too. To me, number 9 deserves both of those honors and deserves them immediately.
I've always thought it was a little silly to have an unofficial retired number, right? Like, when's the last time 8's? Like, Archie's the last to wear 8, right?
Yeah.
So
Archie's the only to wear 8 ever. He was the first to wear it and the only to ever do it.
So it's one of those, like, why not just put it up? Like, why not just officially retire it? So I'm not just going with Drew. Like, if that's the case with Archie Manning, then just retire Archie Manning's number 2. And at this point, I mean this in the nicest way possible. I hope the best health for Archie Manning. Like, he's getting up there.
Yeah.
You might not have much longer to officially do it. Okay. Last question we'll go, just because we're on it. And you said a statue. If you were in charge of putting the statue up, right, which Drew Brees moment would you elect to be the statue? Because you already have Tom Benson holding the Super Bowl trophy outside of the Superdome.
Right.
You have Steve Gleason's block. So which moment do you pick?
I'll tell you, it's really tempting to pick the one where he the spin move and the dive over the goal line against Atlanta in 2018. But that doesn't depict Drew Brees. That depicts Drew Brees, the competitor, perfectly. But that doesn't depict Drew Brees, the passer. Drew Brees, the most accurate quarterback in NFL history, for my money. So rather than pick a moment, I will pick a pose. I think it has to be with him in his trademark passing motion, with his neck and head kind of arced upward, to look downfield the way he did because of his shorter stature over the offensive lineman. I can't do it because I'm having neck pains right now, and I won't fit on the full screen. But you know the pose I mean.
Oh, yeah.
So rather than a moment, I think you have to pick a specific pose. That's the one I would go with.
Craning the neck. Yep.
Yes.
If it was me, I would pick the moment he broke the passing record and pointing with both arms up to the press box, signaling to his wife and his kids. Not the one with the silly piece of paper, but not that one. That was silly, but just pointing up to his family. I think that would be one. I also think it'll be nice because, and he even mentioned it right the other day about how it was a little weird to not have a true goodbye with the fans because of COVID. And I know he's been back to a few games and specifically was honored when he was just doing Sunday Night Football for NBC.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little different. This might be the if they were to induct him and bring him back out on the field. I know he's already in the Ring of Honor. If they were to retire the number, I think that would be a little bit of closure for everybody because there really still hasn't been that closure. It just ended. Also really heartbreaking to hear him say that if it wasn't for he just couldn't do it, he would have played another 3 years because that would have been great. That would have
Listen, I get it. When your body breaks down, you can't stop it. And there are a lot of days, as you know, as a former volleyball player, a high-end and top-tier volleyball player, there are a lot of days I can't lift my arm, above my neck. I'm not saying I can't lift my arm above my neck without pain. That's every day. There are days where I physically cannot lift my arm above my head and hold it up there for any length of time. So I get what Drew's saying, and that just makes it all the sadder. And being on that side of the equation as a competitor, there is no more frustrating feeling in the world than when you physically cannot do it anymore.
Right. Well, guys, on that note, that closes out another edition of the.
Yeah, let me bring the entire elderly crowd down, including myself, on that note.
We're all gonna cry a little bit. It's fine. We're all crying in the background a little bit. Thanks, Bob. We appreciate that. But Bob, for everybody watching, you are still working diligently and hard through the off season, as you always do. So where can people follow you and your work away from the Bayou Blitz podcast?
By this time next week, folks, and I don't know off the top of my head whether Brendan and I will be back with you next Wednesday or next Thursday, but we will be back with you next week. It's starting to look like we have a big announcement for your Bayou Blitz. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We'll keep, if it does indeed happen, we're going to keep teasing it all week, but we're not going to make the official announcement until we're on the air. But in the meantime, you can follow all of us at the Bayou Blitz Facebook group and the Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. You can also follow all of my written works. Bob Rose on Facebook, at Bobby R2613 on Twitter. Things got away from me today. Both Brandon and I were doing some research, a lot of different research for different reasons. So I didn't have anything published today. But tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, I'm going to have a piece on how Jimmy Graham might fit into the Saints' plans if he still wants to play. We kind of hinted at my earlier piece a couple weeks ago about that. I'll go into more detail, and I'll list a couple free agent tight ends out there that the Saints might want to take a look at too. That's just the first of my a handful of pieces that you're going to see from me throughout the rest of the week.
For myself, you can follow me virtually everywhere at BT Boylan. And Bob, you mean to tell me that you and I actually had things to do today? I felt like I had everything to do today. I worked my 9 to 5. I was in real estate class. I'm here now on top of what felt like about 20 other things that kind of just got thrown on throughout the day, but that's adulting, right? Like at the end of the day, it's just, it sucks, kids. Kids watching, you don't want to grow up. You want to be Peter Pan forever. I promise you that. There are some awesome things about being an adult, but there were a lot
Not
more,
many.
there were a lot more awesome things about being a kid. At the end of the day, and if you keep that kid spirit at heart, maybe it never leaves you and it never lets you down. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Until next week, I'm thinking it's going to be Wednesday, but you never know. Bob and I might snap our Thanos hands and change time and everything all over again. But until we see you next time, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity, and we'll see you next time on the Bayou Blitz podcast. Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night.